Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alex Wolkoff, and welcome to the session, Data Evolution and the Unlocking of Commercial Challenges. So this afternoon, we're joined by an experienced and knowledgeable panel, which should make for an interesting discussion. We're joined by Dan Marcus, who is at his consulting firm, Mark X, and was previously co-head of Tradition in the UK. We're also joined by Justin Zhen, co-founder of Thinknum, an alternative data provider. Rob Cranston, head of product at LiquidNet in EMEA and APAC. And Rob Miller, and he's an execution analyst at Vanguard Asset Management. So to kick off our discussion, we obviously have seen that the explosion of data that we use to analyze and to help our jobs within the financial sector has significantly increased. And we've seen the scope of the data has increased to much broader data sets, because the technologies that we now have available to us allow us to draw our own conclusions from the use of tools that are based on basic analytics, but more advanced tools like machine learning and artificial intelligence. So as we have now been discussing these new tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning, I thought it might be quite useful to start with an initial questionnaire or a poll, and to ask you how the automation of processing of data has been progressing. So if you wouldn't mind putting up the first question. Our first question to you is to understand, how are you processing alternative data in your firm? And that includes large data sets as well. So we can get a sense as to adoption of these new technologies. And maybe we can use that in our discussion with our esteemed panelists. So if you can vote away, looking forward to seeing how the results come out. And as we are waiting for those votes to come in, we will probably go to Rob Miller, or Rob M for short, and ask him, as you are at the buy side at Vanguard, how are you using data, and where are you getting it from, and how are you processing that data?
So thank you very much for your introduction. So my name is Rob. I've been at Vanguard for 2 years, where I've got responsibility for the quantitative analytics for European execution. We measure all of our trades, and we use a number of different data sources to do that. So we have our actual trade data. We also source tick data. We use some alternative data pieces, which we get direct from our brokers in terms of unstructured data. So we're looking at specifics around routing logic. We also try and understand every aspect of our trade. So we're also in the process of looking at IOI data and seeing if we can draw any conclusions from that.
Great, fantastic. Thanks for that, Rob. Just as you were talking, then we got some results coming back in, and it seems that we're finding more and more of our participants are actually balancing the analysis of data between manual and automated analysis. It'd be interesting to sort of like get a sense as to what sort of algorithms you use, or whether this is more basic analytic tools that you'll use, Rob, to process the data that you're looking at?
So we do both. So we have, we've got to the stage now where we're quite advanced in our analytics. And so we have a number of reports that are generated on a frequent basis, which are all fully automated. But then we also have the ad hoc research that we do. So anything that's changing, as we know, market structure changes all the time. We had Brexit recently. So how did the new EU venues, how's that affected our trading analytics? And so all of that type of analysis is done ad hoc, and then we also have systematic reports as well.
Fantastic. Justin, just to pull you into the discussion, you're providing alternative data to the financial markets. Who are your customers and how are they processing your data?
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. So we provide alternative data from the web, work with over 300 clients. It ranges from hedge fund, investment banks to long-only asset managers, private equity, venture capital, and then we've expanded well beyond finance. But to answer your question, I think the spectrum of sophistication amongst our clients it's pretty incredible. It's very, very large. There are a lot of traditional asset managers that haven't quite built data teams yet, and they have individual portfolio managers just look at single names, right? So they're exporting, chunks of data to Excel, and then they're plugging that into their models in Excel. And then on the other spectrum, you have quant funds that have been looking at alternative data for 5 years, and they have very sophisticated data teams that can, just pull in multiple APIs or work with very large data sets and really look for patterns amongst multiple data sets. I think one interesting way to think about it is, as a firm, do they have a data team or not? If a firm doesn't have a data team, then with a lot of the new data sets that are coming out, it's just it can be difficult just to solve various mapping challenges or connect different timestamps together. If they do have a data team, then the question is, do they have any machine learning on that data team? Or are they kind of still combining manual versus automated processes? But yeah, we see a very wide range.
Yeah, it's interesting to see when we ran the survey last year to see the adoption of automation, that the percentage seems to be a little bit lower. So it does seem that more and more of the sell side and the buy side are actually looking at automation to process data. Just an interesting snippet, and not necessarily related to the financial sector, but it was interesting to go and see that the European Commission now has a coordinated plan on artificial intelligence. And this is about making sure that there's global leadership and trustworthy AI. So trustworthy artificial intelligence obviously may resonate when we start looking at, well, if we're processing data and drawing, let's say, trading or investment conclusions, could there be some interesting challenges? And is this another way that the European Commission is starting to look at that? I don't know if anyone is particularly concerned about that yet, or should we? Maybe Justin, you have a view on that, or Rob?
I think we're still a bit way for the government to be concerned about artificial intelligence in general. I think there's obviously many corporations and institutions in the private sector that are trying to figure it out. But just in talking to all my clients, there's a very small amount of them that have been successful so far. And I think with anything, it takes a while for the most innovative corporations to figure something out, and then government kind of comes along and they try to get their piece and regulate it. But I think we're a long way from that.
Okay, great, fantastic. Thank you, Justin. Rob, see if I can move more towards your direction. Obviously, you're within a trading venue, and LiquidNet has an interesting business model that seems to be very successful at the moment. Is this about leveraging the data that you have within your platform and sharing new types of data with your clients? And what sort of data is that?
It's a really good question. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me on today. What I would say is, I think we've gone down this road of building out the network, and obviously with the focus on initially on dark block trading. But as the community that we work with has gotten more sophisticated and looked for more information, and I think we've had a long conversation internally about, is it alt data, is it just data? And there's just a lot of it, whatever it is. And as you process more of that data, it's how do you use that and deliver that to people? And I think over the last couple of years, with the start of the investment analytics business and some of the work we've done with the acquisition of OTAS and some of those pieces, I think what we've really been on a journey of doing is combining the analytics and combining the data that is available in the industry, and some of these data sets and these pieces of information that can be grabbed from the web, from bespoke data sources from different providers. But then really the crux for me is the bringing it back to what is useful to the trader and putting it together with the information. I think Justin mentioned the mapping, and you've got this real challenge of there's a lot of data, and there's a lot of data about particular instruments or particular pieces of data, and some of that's more time sensitive than others. But in the end, you need to get that to the people that are need it at the time they need it, and that involves integration into their workflows, and it involves mapping to figure out what they're interested in. I think what we've been doing and had some success with, it's been a long road, is looking at taking those data sets and those interesting pieces of data, which are publicly available, could be put to anybody, but then bringing that as LiquidNet, bringing that to our membership through the communication channels we've got with them. We have a huge distribution network that we can then deliver that data to them when it's of use to them. So I think it's the combination of the two that's really given us a unique position. And obviously with the move into ICAP, you've got the Parameta solutions, you've got the data business that's delivering data that's publicly available and can be sold, and it's just an analytics source, and we can bring that to our membership. Just tying in the question you had a second ago about the manual and automated, some of that is automated. One of the lessons I think we've learned in the last year specifically is exactly about the range of people consuming the data. There are people that want that data automatically given to them. There are a lot of others that want a bit of hand-holding, some coverage, which is more a brokerage function within LiquidNet to say, we can take that data, process it, look at a number of different factors, and then deliver you tailored insights. Building machines to do that is a long process, and that's something that I think we've learned, that there's a lot of manual stepping stones to get down that path, but we can do a bit of both.
So you talk about pre-processing data because let's say a member may be slightly less sophisticated, but do you think they should do you think firms should be focusing on building their own data teams to make sure that they can get their competitive advantage in processing the data? And that's back to you, Rob C, and then maybe Rob M, you might have a view on that as well.
It's a really good question, and I think it depends on what they differentiate on. It depends on what they do. No, not everybody is doing the same thing, and it's pretty, I think it's reasonably well known. If there's a single source of data, if there's a source of data that somebody's fine that's delivering alpha on a regular basis, it's probably been bought by a quant fund, or there's exclusive access to somebody and somebody's acquired that. I think it's a little bit more nuanced how you use all the data sets that are available in the market, and the stuff that isn't delivering immediate alpha or has short-term gain. and put all that together. And that's just down to the trading strategy of the PM and the firm that's actually doing the trading for me to say how they should take in. I don't know how they should use it. It does not make sense for every buy side to build their own data team. It's just not worth the money, and it's not going to drive value for those firms. But there are some that it definitely makes sense to. There's some really good providers out there, such as Justin's firm and what we've got on the Parameta side, that can deliver really useful data to buy sides, so they don't have to do it themselves. But it really depends on the firm.
You agree, Rob Miller?
Yeah, I do agree. I think if a buy side has scale, it makes sense for them to do their own data analysis and collection. It's very specific, especially with execution. It's very specific to that one company's style and experience of trading. I mean, I know there's places that can outsource the data collection and the analytics for it, but that doesn't necessarily give you the best results. So if you obviously have the capacity to do it, I think that's better in-house.
Okay. Cool. I'm going to go change the tack slightly because I want to bring Dan into the discussion. Dan, you've obviously come from a more traditional interdealer broker background, and MiFID really tried to go and change the rules of the game because the brokers that were pulling together information that they had gathered to go and find a match was really about sort of like a discovery process that somebody on the end of a phone would be working hard on. But how's the new world changed since MiFID came into effect, and how has that affected the data that is shared, and how do you think the new data publishing rules under MiFID II has affected things as well?
Sure. So I think, first of all, it's a privilege to be on this panel. So thank you very much. I think when it comes down to interdealer brokers and the progress made over, say, the last 10, 15 years, you've got things that are running in parallel and interrelated. So that's the technological advances in terms of the data that's produced and the distribution, along with those technological gains that our clients have made. So their ability to consume that data, take in alternative data and crunch it and then use it for their own trading purposes, alongside a regulatory environment that, you know, when you come down to the essence of what MiFID II is, it's a piece of transparency regulation. So if you look more at Dodd-Frank, I'd say that started off primarily as an execution piece of legislation. MiFID II was really all about pre and post-trade transparency and the market having visibility and an understanding as to the product that it was trading and the price and the impact of the execution that they were doing. So from an interdealer broker perspective, it was adapting to the needs of the clients and the needs of the regulators at the same time. The sort of slightly fortunate thing is that those needs coincided somewhat. So really, it was a question of, wait a second, so we're a broker, but actually now we are a regulated venue. So we're an OTF or an MTF akin to an exchange. So, you know, we considered a venue from that perspective, which means that the organizational aspects of an interdealer broker has changed. So you have this sort of blue ribbon in terms of being a venue, but also in terms of you providing that data, you need to just be considerably more organized, and you really need to adapt to those needs. Now, when you consider that an interdealer broker trade or brokes a huge array of products ranging from highly illiquid bonds or structured products through to highly liquid electronic products, you then see that there isn't a one-size-fits-all to both comply with the regulation and to satisfy your client's needs. Yeah. But from a data perspective, you have to create this kind of menu. And that menu means that we will deliver this raw data or analytics-based data, because we have the in-house analytic capability, to the client to match up with their needs, primarily to, one, comply with any transparency regulation, and two, to encourage that client to trade with you, if you could. And when I say trade with you, it's really to analyze your data against the other data that comes in. And of course, for best execution purposes, if you can show that the best execution is capable on your venue, then of course you've got more chance of continuing that virtuous circle. They trade with you, the better price goes out, and then they come back and trade with you some more. So from that perspective, everything changes. So we have to be able to deliver either the raw data via API, via web, via cloud, via vendors through traditional enterprise agreements or new adapted agreements, and ensure that this client base can see the raw price that you're delivering, both on a real-time or historic basis, depending on the needs of those clients. And as the guy said before, each client looks at data for different reasons, maybe multitudinous reasons depending on the client, but in many instances, a broker-dealer client and a money manager will look at data for different purposes. So we then have to cater for that and to make sure that we satisfy those needs. So from an IDB perspective, it really has been a revolution that has been data-led rather than execution-led. And the data provision, the transparency that's gone to this wider client base, because 15, 20 years ago, an IDB really just spoke to brokers. And now I think it's best to call them a wholesale market venue, speaks to a wider array of clients with different needs and different delivery requirements, from incredibly sophisticated to less sophisticated. So although the world has not been completely transformed to move electronic from an execution perspective, the world certainly has transformed in relation to the way that we crunch and provide data for our wider client base to consume. And a rather interesting illustration of this is the real value of, if you like, these wholesale market venues that operate as OTS and MTS is not necessarily the most electronic liquid of products, rather the most unelectronic illiquid products, which actually consist of indications of interest, because the price discovery is considerably more difficult. So you can be pretty sure that a long-dated Russian bond would be of considerably more value than a 10-year dollar interest rate swap, where you're producing price changes hundreds of thousands of times a second, and you think it's more valuable, but it isn't necessarily. But it will be considerably more valuable to a high-frequency trading prop firm than the Russian bond data, depending on the nature of what they trade. So you're covering a lot. It's complicated, but in essence, you need to make sure that you can cater for all of those client needs and deliver how that client wants.
Okay. And it seems to be a big growth area for the interdealer brokers as well, because obviously you mentioned, Rob, Parameter, which is looking to resell liquid net data, TPI cap data, but to put it through a dedicated commercial channel. Dan, you were, while you were at Tradition, and a Tradition is very much about selling the data, and you talk about, dare we say, pre-canned analytics to go and help achieve best execution. And it seems that there needs to be this balance between the raw data and the value add data as well, in order for the full broad range of market participants to go and benefit. But to come back to you, Rob M, I'm assuming that someone like Vanguard, who can invest in execution quality analytics, you get potentially slightly better value on the or better return on investment as far as execution quality as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially for us, we know exactly kind of the areas that we want to focus in on and to try and improve, or anything that we see that's changing. And so for us, it's the flexibility of doing it ourselves.
Okay. So just to go and look in, we've got so much to cover in such a short period of time, but we're looking at maybe the sort of like the commercial aspect. We've now started to see different routes to actually buying and actually accessing the data directly, and we're starting to see these direct markets for market data. So if you look on AWS, for example, they have a direct market data. If you look on if you look at Snowflake, they have a market data marketplace. There's a number of other venues out there who are hosting a market data shop front. How successful are they? And is this concept of selling data direct and maybe avoiding the market data vendor and pumping it in directly? Let's ask two questions to each one of the panelists. Do they think that these markets are working? And do you think that clients are interested in directly accessing the data rather than taking it from a market data aggregator like the traditional players? And let's start off with Justin, with you to start off with.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I think these marketplaces, you mentioned Amazon, Snowflake obviously has been very aggressive in kind of expanding recently. This is all a pretty recent thing. 2 years ago, these didn't quite exist, at least not in the alternative data industry. I guess to answer your question, I think there's some value add. The main value add is the ability to ingest large data sets. So being able to take in that data set and store it somewhere. So me as a vendor, instead of having to share some API key and have someone call millions of rows quickly, I can just kind of host it on a Snowflake. There's some value add there, but I think it still doesn't solve some of these other problems that are critical in using new data sets. As Rob Cranston mentioned, I have all this market data. Now I'm trying to take in a new source. I still have to map it. I still have to tie in the entities together. I still have to timestamp it appropriately. So these are the really time-consuming problems that's creating a bar to using alternative data sets. Less so the hosting, but yes, I do think that there's some marginal value that's added.
And do you have a different model, a pricing model, depending on which route, or do you think?
Oh, good to know. You're using the methods available to be able to distribute data, and I think it's a combination of all of it. It really is, because I think it is fascinating being in the middle of these conversations with the regulators about the new cloud providers and who should be regulated and all of these pieces and where this is going. And I remember years ago when I was at Reuters, they were already doing cloud provision of tech data. It was just a case of, it was just in a slightly different way. It may not have had Amazon on the label. It was just somebody else doing it. The innovation is brilliant. And I think this is helping to push forward how we store data, how we access data. Many firms have tried to come into financial data and build generic solutions and struggled for, it's complex. It is complicated. Getting the right data to the right people at the right time and putting that all together with everything else they're doing, along with all the timing constraints, is very difficult. So it's not an easy game to get into, but the innovation is not going to stop. And that's a huge positive. So I think exactly as Justin was saying, the distribution mechanism is what is efficient, what solves the client's problem. And in the end, it's about the client. It's about either the person you're trying to get the data to and what problem they're trying to solve. And then you pick a method that actually gets to them. The cloud stuff is brilliant because it just helps us. It does help in cases to give us a more cost-effective way of distribution across a wide number of clients.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the ability to open up direct connectivity. It's kind of interesting that I recently saw an article where Nordea had made a statement that their market data vendor was considering a new charging model where they would charge differently for depending on who was actually processing the data. So if it was a human, it would be price X, but if it was a robotic process automation or an algorithm, that they might charge more for that. There seems to be fairly tight constraints being put on the market data providers, but we still see the market data aggregators and the market data vendors still seeming to escape the regulation at the moment. I'll start off with Dan. Do you think this is fair?
It's a good question. It captures the venues, because the regulation and ESMA capture the venues. The venues provide the raw material data that then use vendors and other distribution channels, as the guys have been talking about, to get to the end client. So how can ESMA regulate the venues effectively to control this? Now, if you look at ESMA's paper on market data, what they're talking about in terms of the costs and fees, it's quite interesting, because it's a bit like the MiFID II requirement in relation to venues transparency on trading fees, but goes further, because it then obviously talks about full analysis and transparency in relation to the costs. So it's almost like a cost plus model, which then makes it somewhat utilitarian and commoditized. And then a vendor gets it, they layer their cost into it, and that's more and more cost. So yeah, great. But actually, what is ESMA doing? It's creating a vast amount of onerous obligations in relation to transparency and all of the other requirements in relation to controlling the fees, and thereby increasing the cost of distribution and provision of data. So the increase of the costs of complying with this increase the overall costs. And again, they're trying to put a bit of a one size fits all in relation to the particular products, which again, I think is very difficult, because you'd look at this and go, well, what's it trying to stop? It's trying to stop predatory pricing or monopolistic high pricing. But actually, probably 90% of the data that actually comes out there, certainly from wholesale market brokers, is where there's 3 or 4 significant competitors in there, where the end client needs to get at least 2 or 3 of those data sources to get a complete picture. So again, I kind of think it's a bit of a blunt tool to try and solve a problem that's not necessarily applicable across all venues producing data. But I understand where they're coming from, I guess we'll see. This is all very new, so we'll see what comes out of this and what the reaction of clients are to the venues and to the vendors in relation to the fees that they're paying for data.
Right. Okay. Rob M, I'm probably not going to go and challenge you so much on the regulatory sides, but given the size of Vanguard, you're probably in the position where you can go directly to a lot of these market data providers, because you've got the critical mass to dedicate technical teams to process the data and provide it to you for your execution analytics. Do you believe that makes sense? Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly can do, and we do for some data sources. Others, that are not as critical to what we're analyzing at the moment, we might use something that's already been normalized for us, and we'll ingest via like an API or something. But we can go direct to the source. Yeah.
So that's all well and good for a Vanguard, but if you're a small asset manager, you're at a disadvantage because you have to go to a market data vendor, don't you? So it can be a bit of a challenge. So, to a certain extent, I think some of the market data vendors may use their power to, let's say, take control, or to use their power to assert their position. I'd like to go and ask the second poll question, which is, how involved do we think regulators should be in market data commercials? And you can see there we've got the open capitalist, which says regulators should be nowhere near it. You may have a view that the balance is right. I thought actually it might be worthwhile putting in the balance is right, but there needs to be better policing of the current rules. Or do we actually think there needs to be more stringent rules for the pricing of data? And while we look at collecting those results, maybe we could have a quick round of our members here as to what they think, and if there should be more stringent rules, where do they think the focus should be? Maybe start again with you, Dan.
Yeah, well, I sort of outlined my views in relation to ESMA's intent in relation to data. I think from my perspective, transparency is key. So the whole point of MiFID II regulation is transparency of data. How about transparency in relation to the fees and an understandable way of charging, so at least the consumer understands what they're buying? So for me, and again, it's kind of how some of the brokers have developed, and I'm sure parameters are the same, is that allowing the client more choice in what they buy, i.e. they wish to pick this out or that out rather than have to buy an entire package or pay for an entire year, enables the client to actually get better value for money. If the client can then choose, understand what it's paying, and has a transparency in relation to what it is paying, then the regulator, you'd hope, would be minded to not regulate to the degree that they think they should. So, you know, again, we'll see how that develops. They're clearly trying to solve a problem. My question is how significant is that problem for the majority of market data that's produced? I think from a user perspective, there's always a debate. Wait a second, you're selling me back my data. That's another issue entirely, and comes down to ownership, legal ownership, derivation of data, and then producing it back out, and the value that the venue creates and then sells back. There is definitely an industry argument in relation to a potential, say, data dividend going back to the user who contributes to the data that the venue then produces. Obviously, the regulation doesn't go there because there's legal aspects around that. But I think that will be a much more debated topic going forward, because of the absolute essential need for users to consume data considerably more than there's ever been before.
Okay, thanks, Dan. If I could summarize your initial part of your answer to say you think the balance might be right, but some better application of the rules, certainly as far as being able to segment into the data, which was one of the intentions of the original set of rules. Would that be fair?
Yeah, better market practice. And it's difficult. You know, the balance between better market practice and venues being honourable, if you like, and transparent, versus a regulator doing what it thinks it's right to make the venue doing it is difficult because it creates these unintended consequences. Okay,
thanks, Dan. Rob C, sorry, I'd love to get your view on this.
My experience has been being at Reuters when MiFID II came through, and just before that, as we were looking at it, it was you were looking at all the segregations that could be available. Obviously, the exchanges, speaking more on the equity side, where more of my experience is, the exchanges are incentivized to create different products and to respond to client demand to create these different pieces. Now, creating what could be 30, 40 different flavors of data to create segregations or pieces of data, it's very difficult. And honestly, I think there's a level of market incentive to not do that. And I think where the regulators could go, and I've always had this thought that there's been obviously a lot of chat today and a lot of chat over time about a consolidated post-trade tape. And let's stick to post-trade. There's a level of data that should be available to the market. And I can see that there's infrastructure and there's support and everything that needs to be able to be paid for, and the exchanges need to be able to innovate and push forward to provide additional services to people. But there's a level of data that needs to be basically available to the market across asset classes, honestly. The question is that what those data points are not clearly stated. It's not, you don't have this, the last trade price needs to be free from every exchange after 15 minutes. That is not, that's not firmly stated somewhere to say that is the case. I think if you went to a level of, there's a base level of data that is regulated, I think it would solve a lot of the noise and let people innovate in the space they can innovate in, and define where innovation, no, this is just data, this is just transparency. And I think that's the bit where there probably was, I remember talking about producing the consolidated tape. That was a case where there was too much stick, not enough carrot, honestly, for the vendors, because you got beat senseless if you got anything wrong, but there was no value to you to really do it. With some of these other data points, I think it's just getting that clear definition of this is stuff that should be available to the market. And then the exchanges and the producers of that data know what the rules are, they make that available and they innovate on the other stuff. It becomes easier.
Yeah, it was a big ask to go and segment data tightly. And as a fellow product manager in the same organization when I was there, I know how difficult this is.
The conversation about DAX codes alone was just not like that. Forget it.
Yeah. Rob Miller, just maybe a final word from you on that as a consumer. How you think the pricing potentially of market data should be done? More controls or less?
Well, I would kind of agree with Dan's point about, you know, how much are we going to get charged for our own input into the data, and so that's probably our biggest issue with how much is being charged. And then also, if anyone has a monopoly on certain data streams, then, you know, obviously there's a risk there that they can start charging unfair prices.
Right. Okay. So more of this sort of like revenue sharing models would be interesting. I know there's been some ideas about this in the past, thinking back to MiFID I and ideas of BOAT and other initiatives like that. But it seems we've never seen that actually go on for a long time. We're coming towards the end of the session, and just wondering if the team from the fixed trading community want to facilitate asking any questions. Is there anybody that would like to in the audience to ask a question before we close? We've got a broad but highly experienced panel here. It would be good to see if anyone had a question before we closed. No questions at all. Well, if there are no questions, what I would like to do is to say thank you very much to Rob Miller, to Rob Cranston, Justin Zhen, and Dan Marcus. It's been a really interesting discussion. I don't know how we crammed all of those big topics in just 45 minutes, and certainly open for further discussion later on, because there was some big subjects to cover there. So thank you very much to you all, gentlemen, and thank you all for participating, to our audience and listening to us. We hope that was an interesting session for you, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much for joining, everybody. A recording of the session will be available in the next few days and will be up on the event platform for 30 days if you'd like to rewatch it. The next session on stream 1 is FinTech, Where is the Innovation? And the next session on stream 2 is Fix Next Gen. So make sure to check those out. Thank you.